I'd been an honor student in high school. I played violin for hours every day. I had big dreams. I was doing well in math classes, literature classes. Right before I began my freshman year of college, I became very interested in DNA and how diseases work. I started to study molecular biology. I loved it. My first 3 years at the university were wonderful. I was concertmaster of the university community orchestra. I started doing research. The wonderful professor, 3 publications later came out of my research. But during my 3rd year at the university, I started looking for something more. I was losing interest in my studies, which was a new problem for me. I'd always had straight A's, always been a great student. But after my junior year of college, in order to try to search for something more, I decided to go to Nairobi and live with the poor for a couple of months. I loved Africa. It was wonderful to be there and to meet so many special people and to help. But when I returned from Africa, I wasn't the person who I'd been when I left. I was traumatized. I could think of nothing but what I saw there. And maybe that would have been normal for a few days or even a few weeks, but for me, it became a problem that was just getting worse. That time was my fall semester of my senior year of college. I was thinking a lot about my graduation and what I was going to do next. But I remember that semester, I went to different classes. I always attended lectures. I was reading the books, and I couldn't focus anymore. It was like somehow going to Africa had put my mind in this cloud. I remember that semester I took an exam in an advanced genetics class, and I was certain I had a perfect score on the exam. And I'd gotten great scores in exams, perfect scores before. I remember I got the exam back and I had failed it. I couldn't believe it. It was like a nightmare. My brain just wasn't working anymore. I didn't know what to do. I was very embarrassed. At that time, I contacted my mom and dad. I wanted them to give all of their money to poor people I'd stayed with in Nairobi, which of course they were not going to do. I became confused and a little bit angry, and I'd always had a wonderful relationship with my mom and dad, but at that time I could hardly even speak to them. I knew inside my heart that I couldn't study anymore, but I just couldn't admit it. That fall semester, my senior year, I failed all of my classes. I lost touch with my parents. And for the first time, I started showing some very concrete symptoms of having a mental illness. In March of 2003, just months after I'd failed my classes, I became delusional. I believed that I was supposed to take a flight to Boston, and I believed that when I was in Boston, I would meet a man who I thought I might marry, who was very rich, who would help me go to Africa again and fight for the rights of the poor. I got on the plane and I went to Boston, and I waited in the airport for 10, I think 12 hours, and no one came. And I didn't know what to do. I didn't have enough money in my bank account to change my flight and go back to California. Finally, I contacted a friend in Southern California who paid for my airline ticket change. I flew back, and at that time, I lost my place to live, which I couldn't pay for, and became homeless. I had no idea that my homeless situation would last for 4 years. The first 3 years, I spent a lot of time, I hate to admit it, in university libraries. I'd fall asleep in the middle of the night with the students who studied hard day after day. Spend some time in bathrooms of buildings that were not used much at night. Occasionally stayed with friends. After about 3 years of living here and there in the libraries, I started hearing voices. I remember it was the end of January 2006. I was sitting somewhere on the university campus, and I heard this group of students, maybe 20 or 30 of them, from a distance, making fun of me, calling me a homeless hoodlum. At first, I I almost liked it. It was so negative and nasty, but somehow I enjoyed having the attention. I didn't know yet that it was a hallucination. A couple months went by and I had more experiences like that, and I did begin to realize that something was very wrong. At that time, I also began hearing voices. I heard a chorus of children's voices in the back of my mind saying all kinds of things. Sometimes they insulted me and were negative. Other times they told me I had a bright future, I'd be one of the most powerful people in the world, and other things like that that were ridiculous but felt wonderful. The voices got worse and worse. It was about 6 months after I began hearing voices that they started commanding me to do things, walk here or there, go eat something. Sometimes just, go right or left. It could be a small immediate command or a command that might take me hours to execute. And as the voices got stronger and stronger, I couldn't ignore them, and they essentially turned me into a different person. It was about that time, October 2006, that I was actually arrested for the first time. I remembered my first 3 years as an honors student at the university, and for years after I became homeless, I felt I was still welcome there. I thought that I was going to win a Nobel Peace Prize and that the university would be thrilled that they let me sleep on the campus after I became one of the most powerful people in the world. But of course, the university didn't think that way. And it was a day in October of 2006 that I was sleeping in a very nice lounge where professors and graduate students were supposed to be. And, I was taken that day and put in jail. It was really difficult being in jail. For one, I didn't feel guilty. I thought it had all been a mistake. I still believed I was going to be the Nobel Prize winner. But the jail was very, very dark. It was a really terrifying experience. I just wanted natural light, very little natural light. One good thing about jail was I didn't have to search for food. I'd been looking for food in the garbage literally for years, and they gave us food while I was in jail, but I couldn't wait to get out. It was about 6 weeks later that I was jailed a second time. That time I'm not exactly sure why I was jailed. I had been walking around the campus all day hearing voices, kind of talking back to the voices. I was having some hallucinations. I went to a churchyard and I just laid down in the middle of the day, and the police came and picked me up. And I don't know if they'd been looking for me or exactly why I was picked up that day, but they happened to get me Wednesday evening before Thanksgiving. And I was in jail the second time from right before Thanksgiving until after the holiday. And it was actually one of the best times I could have been picked up because there would not have been a lot of garbage to eat during that weekend. Anyway, so I was picked up by police one more time. That was in March of 2007, March 3rd. It actually happened to be 4 years after I became homeless to the day. But that day, they didn't take me to jail. They took me to a hospital where I was evaluated for mental illness. I hadn't been in touch with my parents for 4.5 years since after I'd come back from Africa and wanted them to give all of their money away to Africa. The doctors and staff asked me if I wanted to be in touch with my mom and dad. And I remember thinking to myself, why would they want to be in touch with me after all these years when I've rejected them? And, I didn't graduate from college. Why would they still want to be in touch with me? I'm in a mental facility. But I decided to give my parents the opportunity to speak with me if they wanted to. And I remember speaking with my mom, and she was so kind and loving, and she didn't want revenge. She wasn't angry. When I was willing to speak with them, they flew out to California 24 hours or so after I'd been picked up. Anyway, I was in that hospital in California for about 2.5 weeks, and they put me on Risperdal, and then I came back to Ohio. What I didn't know was that after I got on Risperdal, some really horrendous side effects would show up. When I got back to Ohio, I started sleeping 16 to 18 hours a day, not because I was lazy, but because I was very, very drugged. My arms and my legs felt really tense and heavy like lead. I was restless all the time. I could hardly read. And Risperdal was really bad for me. I do know that there are people who do very, very well on Risperdal, but I was one of those people who really suffered from the side effects. When I got home and the Risperdal was that bad, I decided to go off it. I remembered who I used to be when I was a child with my parents growing up, and I was certain I didn't need an antipsychotic. And then I ended up in a hospital in Ohio for a brief amount of time. After my second hospitalization, at that point, I realized that I needed to be on medication. Risperdal was changed to Invega, still had terrible side effects. For a year, I was on meds every day, but different ones. I tried Zyprexa and Geodon and Abilify. Abilify was great, hardly any side effects, but it didn't stop the voices either. Zyprexa was really similar. I didn't even gain weight on Zyprexa, but it didn't really help my hallucinations. So after a year of this, we met with Dr. Nasrallah. He became my new doctor, and he decided to try clozapine. And at that time, it almost felt like a lost cause. I tried so many different medications, and then clozapine required a weekly blood draw at first, but we had to try it. And it was amazing. Being on clozapine after a couple months was like a miracle. The voices became quieter and quieter, and then finally they just disappeared. All my other hallucinations were gone. I also lost some weight. I gained 20 pounds on other antipsychotics. When I switched to clozapine, I lost 15 of that. So I was really happy. I was still sleeping 11 or 12 hours at night, but that was much, much better than 16 or sometimes 18 hours. The tenseness I had in my arms and legs, that disappeared. I wasn't restless anymore. I was just me again. It was amazing. It was about a year after I'd been on clozapine that we decided it was time for me to try to go back to school and finish that last year of my degree. My parents were wonderful, and I could never, ever have made the recovery I did without my parents. But even after we found clozapine, my parents were not going to stop. They kept encouraging me to go back to school. So in fall of 2009, I found an apartment, some roommates, registered in genetics class, and then at the end of the semester, I got my A, and I realized that I could do it. I was going to graduate. I'd hoped to finish 1 year full-time. I ended up finishing in 2 years part-time because I was pretty tired from the antipsychotic. But after 2 years, I finished my degree. I had a 3.84, and I was a student marshal during my graduation. My parents came to my graduation. Dr. Nasrallah was there, close friends, and it was amazing. It was a really wonderful day. It wasn't just a victory for me. It was a victory for my parents, for my doctor, friends, other people who had cared and who'd been instrumental in my recovery. And then I planned to spend, 4 to 6 months writing my memoir. It actually took 2 years and 4 months to finish it. But it came out last June 2014. And my mother's book, Flight from Reason, also came out. Her perspective on my life, focusing on the 4.5 years we were apart and focusing on my hospitalizations and her perspective on the time when I was trying different medications. So we both have two very different books on one story. So if I were to give advice to clinicians, I think I'd like to just say, never ever give up on your patients, I mean, for me, we like to joke that on a 1 to 10 scale in psychosis, I was an 11. I was very, very sick, and many of the doctors who saw me thought there was no chance of a complete recovery, but it happened. So I like to say, never give up, and, also to recognize that, with each patient, they're not a statistic. Each one of them has a unique, special story. They have dreams too. Even the craziest patient, their person inside. So I just encourage doctors to have compassion and to not give up. And I'm really grateful every day for people who have dedicated their lives to psychiatry so that there can be success stories like me. Thanks.